Hi everyone, I'm Sandy and welcome back to my channel. Today I have my BookTube Prize quarterfinal reviews and rankings for you. I recorded the thoughts about each book as I read them, so that will go next, and then I do the rankings at the very end. I'll have timestamps down in the description for you so you can skip ahead or skip a book that you may not want to hear about yet if it didn't make it to the next round. But on to the reviews. So my group that I have happened to have a book in it that I read for my last round, which was Did You Hear Mammy Died, which was my #1 book of that group. So I'm really excited to see where it lands in this. The book that I did finish my next book in the BookTube Prize, which was I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy. And so I'm up in Whistler. So I'll put a book cover up here, but I listened to this as the audiobook, and Jeanette McCurdy actually narrated it, and she is an actress as well. So she did a really great job with the audiobook. But the book itself, the first thing is I don't know who Jeanette McCurdy is. I'd never heard of her. I didn't watch the show she was on, which was apparently iCarly, which was on Nickelodeon. And so for me, going into this, much like with Did You Hear Mammy Died, I didn't know who Seamus O'Reilly was either. So I had to go into it very, very blind. And the book has to hold kind of its own then if I don't know the person. And I would say that this book definitely did that. Jeanette McCurdy, as an actress on a TV show when she was a child, her mother is the one who wanted her to act. She didn't really have any interest in acting, but her mom was so important to her, and she tried to make her mom happy so often that she sacrificed what she wanted in order to make her mom happy. Everything from what she was wearing to what she was eating to acting. And acting really took over her life after that. And her mother, was very destructive and very influential, and set her on the path to eating disorders, anorexia, bulimia, on the path to alcoholism, codependency. I mean, just all the issues that she had. And she was very defensive of her mother through much of the book until kind of the end of it. And in that, it was, just kind of her realizations of how much damage her mom had done and how long it took her to get out of that. So very, very powerful. I was surprised by how much I actually liked it, considering I don't know who she is, or I've never watched her, and the problems that come along with fame, which she had at a young age before she knew how to deal with anything, and her decision to get away from acting because she didn't like it, and how long it took her to make that decision even after her mom had passed away. So very, very good. Be curious to see where it ends up in the rankings. But Jeanette McCurdy, I'm Glad My Mom Died, was my first book of this round that I read. I have Half American, I think, with me. So I might pick that up. I don't know. We'll see. All right. The next book that I finished reading is Half American by Matthew F. Delmont. This book, the epic story of the African Americans fighting World War II at home and abroad. So I have read a number of different World War II books or fiction set in World War II. It is, I do actually really like reading books about that time, but they are often stories that are the same or fairly the same about this time period. This one was not the same. This actually focused more on African Americans here in the US and their experience both volunteering in the military, volunteering at different, not volunteering, but working at different plants that are supplying the different military areas, and what their treatment was like. And it was pretty horrific. African Americans had to pay taxes. They were volunteering left and right, but they were often turned away. And their experiences when they were accepted were not equal. They were only allowed to work in mess halls for the large part, and not necessarily out there there fighting. And the other really interesting point that I thought about this book was there was a note in here about how after the war, any involvement that African Americans had in the war was basically kind of scrubbed clean of that history. The only one that I had actually heard of was the Tuskegee Airmen, which is the fighter pilots, but there were a number of other examples in this book. The most disturbing stuff that I found in this book was after they came home. These amazing men and women that were fighting and helping in the war effort came home, and they still experienced the same incredible racism that they had before they left. Here they were fighting fascism in Germany against Hitler, and they come home and they see no whites only signs everywhere. And it was very, very heartbreaking, very difficult reading some of those different pieces. And I also feel like it's difficult because I don't know as a country if we learn anything from history. And so for me, this was a very good and powerful read, and was a different story for the World War II piece. And I'm very glad that it was told, because I think it's an important one to tell. But I was surprised by how much I really got into this particular piece and all the different stories and all of the heroes that were described in this book that I never knew of before. So very, very good. Half American by Matthew F. Delmont. We'll see where it ends up in the ranking. All right, book number 4 that I read was Under the Skin, The Hidden Toll on Racism on American Lives and the Health of Our Nation by Linda Villarosa. Man, there's a heck of a glare on that, isn't there? This is a library book, of course. This particular book really goes through and talks about, like the cover says, how racism is really impacting health, where the author previously had thought that it was more poverty, social conditions that was causing a bigger toll on the health of Americans. They have discovered that really the biggest toll is racism. And really it's demonstrated in a lot of individual stories. So it goes through and shows stories from everyone who are in extreme poverty to superstars like Serena Williams and the birth of one of her children. And it tries to show you a wide gamut of different scenarios where and how racism has impacted individual decisions about health. One of the most poignant ones was it was a woman who had breast cancer, who had insurance, who had access to health care, and said they didn't want to go to the hospital because of how they would be treated. And that's heartbreaking to think about. I am obviously not a person of color, so I cannot speak to that. I have seen and witnessed, unfortunately, discrimination on the level of someone who is obese with one of my parents, and it is heartbreaking to watch. It is really, really tough. And that is, I'm sure, only a small component of what people of color experience every single day. So the book itself, the themes in it, the discussion in it were all wonderful. Unfortunately, the book didn't really work for me for some reason, and it was largely, I think, had to do with how it was told. Again, because it bounces all over the place from a timeline perspective. And I struggle with books. I struggle with novels that do that, but I really struggle with nonfiction that does this, because it should be showing kind of a chronological escalation of some of these things. And so it would show something in history, and then it would bounce to more current times, and that would show back in history. And for me, that just didn't work as much. While the topic was really good, the individual stories were really amazing, the writing style itself lost me a bit. So that was Under the Skin by Linda Villarosa. We'll see where it ends up. The next book that I finished was Blood and Ruins by Richard Overy. The Last Imperial War, 1931 to 1945. This book is a monster at over 900 pages. It is incredibly detailed about everything leading up to World War II, everything in not just Europe and Central Europe, but also in Asia, in the United States. It covers everything you could possibly want to know about the lead up to strategy, to a lot of different components of everything having to do with World War II. A lot of that's in this book I didn't know about. There were a lot of components to it that were not necessarily focused on the fighting, and it wasn't necessarily focused on a lot of the same things that we might see in other stories of World War II, but it was incredibly detailed. It had everything from the finances to the war effort to what labor forces look like all across the world. Anyone who was involved in basically this particular war. If you like history and you like reading books about history, this is going to be a phenomenal book for you because this has so much information in it. It really does. It is incredibly well researched. There's a lot to it. It is, like I said, 800 plus pages of it. And for a history buff, I could see how this would be the top pick for someone. I am not a history person. I loved G-Man, or I didn't love G-Man. I liked G-Man when I read it for the first round. But this book is so long and so dense. It was a struggle to make it through. It really was. I wanted to really get pulled into it, but it was so dense. I felt like I was reading a textbook a lot of the time, where some of the nonfiction books that I've read have pulled in stories of other people, of specific stories of people, and it helps you relate to the context of the book. This is just fact after fact after fact after fact. And it is just, unfortunately, not my kind of book. It'll be really interesting to see what happens with the rankings, because I do feel like if you love history, this might be a highly ranked one. I struggled through it. I really did struggle through it. So I'm very glad. I'm glad that I'm done with it. I don't even really want to talk about it anymore because it's just, unfortunately, it's not my kind of book, and that really will impact where it falls in the ranking. All right, the last book that I have for the BookTube prize this round is The Song of the Cell. This particular book, I have read another book by this author. I read The Emperor of All Maladies, which is a book about cancer, and really, really liked that book. This one was also an absolutely wonderful book. It is all about biology and the cell and how cell works, how there are different kinds of cells, how different cells react to bacteria, how they react to disease, all of these different components. Very, very detailed. But what I love about his writing is that he intersperses personal stories and real people throughout the science in this book. And it is really informative and very, very well done. I will say that this book unfortunately had the place of being last read, and I have been on a bit of a BookTube prize burnout after reading Blood and Ruins. So for me, it'll be interesting when I say where this book ends up in the rankings, because it was very well done, but it didn't get as high, and I think that's unfortunate because I do think it would have ranked out a little bit higher if I had read it maybe earlier and not been quite as burned out on nonfiction. But I'll be really curious to see if it makes it through to the next round. All right, my rankings. All right. Number 6 is going to be Blood and Ruins by Richard Overy. Yeah, that book, I just really struggled with that particular book. It had so much detail in it, and it just really wasn't for me. I don't know that it's a bad book. I just know that for me, it was very, very tough. That is why Blood and Ruins ended up in my 6th spot. It'll be really interesting to see if it makes it. Book number 5 is Under the Skin by Linda Villarosa. This book actually was a Pulitzer Prize finalist, and I loved the topic in this book. I thought it was very important, very relevant to today, but the writing style in it, really for me, I struggled with, which is why I ended up putting it in spot number 5. Book number 4 is going to end up being this one, The Song of the Cell, an exploration of medicine and the new human. I think this one and book 3, I feel like I could be interchangeable for those two. But I did like this one quite a bit more than the other 2 books, which is why I ended up putting it in position number 4. Position number 3 is Half American by Matthew F. Delmont, the story of Black Americans in World War II, in the lead up to World War II, at home, overseas. There were stories in this that I had never heard of, which is part of why I really, really liked this, and the lack of recognition that so many people did not get with their involvement in this major, major conflict. It wasn't just the stories that were really important, it was also what happened after and the efforts to kind of erase people from history that I found really moving and really interesting. And that's why that one ended up in my number 3 spot. My number 2 and my number 1. Okay, these 2 books, I feel like I could interchange either way. One of them is a book that I read the last round and didn't reread, and then the other one that I read. So number 2, like I said, very tough. Number 2, I ended up putting I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy. This memoir by Jeanette McCurdy, it was really talking about her time while she was on the show iCarly and her time before that, and her mother who, man, her mother was a piece of work. And all of the things that she did to her while she was trying to increase her career. I put it in the number 2 spot because ultimately my number 1 I felt like was a bit more just hopeful, which I really liked quite a bit, and I liked the tone and the narrative in my number 1 a little bit more. So, but I did like this one quite a bit. I would not be upset if this one makes it through. My number 1 is going to stay though, Did You Hear Mammy Die by Seamus O'Reilly. I'm keeping this one number 1 because there are components of that story that have stuck with me, that have still made me laugh when I think about it. It is why I've kept it in the number 1 spot. I don't know. I think about the only book that I'd be kind of unhappy about making it through to the next round, to be honest with you, is Blood and Ruins, just because it was such a tough read. Such a tough read for me personally. Like I said, if you like history and you like long, intensive history books, you probably would like that one. But for me, oh, no. It wasn't a good book for me. I'm still going on about that one. Clearly, I have issues. But that is my ranking for the BookTube Prize quarterfinals. I judged nonfiction round section B. I can't wait to see what made it through. By the time this video goes live, we will already know. So, as always, like, comment, and subscribe. And until next time, everyone, thanks. Bye.